Hello, everybody. Welcome back to more of this afternoon session on the first day of the virtual Good Clinical Practice Summit. I want to thank all of you who are returning. For those of you who have just joined us for the first time for a live session today, I want to draw your attention over to the left-hand side to the chat box. This is where we will be chatting, engaging with each other, commenting on the presentations, commenting on the slides, engaging however way you want. If you have a specific question that you want to ask to the speaker, you want to click on the Q&A next to the chat tab on the left-hand side. Once you put your question in and hit submit, it will disappear, but it doesn't disappear for everyone. It shows up in a queue for us and the speakers on the back end to be able to see and sort through. This preserves anonymity. So if you don't care about anonymity and want to crowdsource, feel free to submit your questions via the chat if you're not looking for specific answers from the speakers. But be sure to use both of these tools to stay engaged. We have some great presentations to close out this day. So we're going to start with a presentation on a site assessment tool for remote monitoring. And this is going to be fantastic. We're actually going to walk through how to do this. It looks great. Ken Lowney, who is the head of operations in the Americas for Agatha Inc., is going to be presenting this session. And I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Ken.
Thank you so much, Kristen. It's really nice to be with you and with everyone again today. As you said, this is really a different kind of session. I've been in 4 or 5 conferences this year, all on the topic of remote monitoring, but most of them have been more me sharing my research findings, etc. This time I want to be very down to earth and share with you a tool. And the tool is a site assessment tool or methodology for remote monitoring. Let's start with exactly what do I mean by remote monitoring. And the key is to say, when I'm talking today, I'm speaking about the remote monitoring process or function, that is monitoring clinical studies without traveling to the sites. And I only say that because there could be confusion that I'm talking about remote technologies such as a remote monitor for a heart or some biological function. That's not my goal today. I spent all year focused on remote monitoring, the move to remote monitoring, technologies for remote monitoring, etc. And out of that has come some very interesting things. The first is that my company, the company, Agatha, built a remote monitoring application. But just as important, I did a lot of work on figuring out how people would adopt those technologies, the change function, if you will. And as part of that, it's very clear that a tool set could be very useful in deciding which sites are more susceptible to the use of remote monitoring. Before I jump to that, let me just do a quick little introduction to the concepts I'll be talking about. In my research on remote monitoring, after speaking to more than 100 sites, sponsors, and CROs, it became very clear that the organizational factors are paramount to success. The technology is important, but to be honest, it's not rocket science. What's absolutely critical is the adoption model, the change management model for implementing remote monitoring. We did a formal survey in the summer, and we asked specifically, what are the perceived obstacles? And the obstacles to remote monitoring, excuse me. And you'll see on this graph a couple of the large number items that really grabbed a lot of the focus. Specifically on the top left, you'll see 60% identified site-related issues. We'll call it site readiness issues. So that's really what I'm focused on here is if sites are the critical factor, how do we choose the right sites? How do we help make them successful? One of the things I learned before I get into anything about methodology is just changing perspectives. As a software company selling into life sciences, we ourselves, people like me, are very focused on sponsors and CROs. Traditionally, we don't do a great job about having a perspective that is inclusive, much less focused on the site. So I had to learn And through my research, through the interviews, I really learned that it's a different world, that sites speak a different language. For years, I've been speaking about trial master file, TMF. Sites don't talk TMF. They talk the binder file. They talk the investigator site file. They talk lots of languages, but they don't speak sponsor talk in the same way. So we all who are working with sites, unless you're someone who's running a site, need to adopt our language and adopt our mindset. I learned other things that are different for sites. Economics are very different. The available funding, for instance, for things like software, the amount of time available at sites is much less for training and activities like that. They have these things called patients, and those patients keep them very busy. So changing the mindset was a big part of it. And lastly, before I get into the real work today, understanding that we can't add to the burden on the sites. The sites have a burden already with what they do, and we can't. So thank you, and I totally apologize for the interruption. These are the days of Zoom, so hopefully you'll have some sympathy for me. Try to get my heart rate under control and continue on. I was talking about the need to be cognizant of the burden that we place on sites as we go to put in new systems that could add to that burden, which will cause them to fail. In other words, the projects will fail. Let's get right into the meat of my goal today, which is to transfer to you a tool set. And it is a tool set for assessing sites. So here's the scenario. You yourself are at a CRO, a sponsor, maybe even a site, and you're thinking about shifting to a remote monitoring strategy. And the question is, where do I start and with whom do I start? And this tool is specifically to say, let's talk about how you choose the sites to work with first. It's a simple model, but a little bit sophisticated. Is that okay to say both? I'm not sure that's an oxymoron. I think it's okay. It's a 5-dimensional model. Let me run through the 5 dimensions. Relationship factors. So again, remember the scenario. What's your relationship with the sponsor or CR's relationship to the site? Is it long-standing and based on trust? What are the study attributes? Is the study right for a shift to remote monitoring? How many sites are involved? How big is the study? What phase is the study? The site study, the staff aptitude. How do you assess the aptitude of the site admins to move to new processes like this? The site team dynamics. Is this a happy group? What's the leadership relationship to the CRAs, etc.? And the systems and practices they have in place. So these are 5 dimensions. And as you're going to see, we could just say, oh, it's pretty good. Let's choose this site. This just adds a little bit of scientific rigor. And even that's being generous. It adds a little rigor. Let's take away the scientific, a little rigor to the process. So remember this word dimensions. These are the 5 dimensions. Now for each dimension, we have 10 factors. So factors are underneath the dimension. And a factor is a specific rateable item. So these are factors for the first dimension, the relationship factors. Very simply, we have worked with the site previously over multiple studies. Very true, not true, or somewhere in between. And you get the idea how the slides would work from a 1 to 7. I'm choosing randomly, but another question, we know the CRAs and the admins of the site personally. When I say personally, it means you speak to them on a first name basis. Maybe you know how many kids they have. So there's a relationship there. And I'll just choose another as an example. The site is highly motivated to work with us. They like us. They want to be a part of the study. They're eager for the business, whatever. So these are things that you can rate 1 to 7. You with me so far? We have dimensions and we have factors. Doesn't get much more complicated, so trust me. Now, what do? We go through some interviews. We go through all 5 dimensions. We rate these factors if we don't know off the top of our head. And then we add them up. So out of 70, this particular site scored 58 on relationship factors, 62 on site attributes, 56 on staff aptitude, a 43 on the team dynamics, and a 54 on the site systems and practices. As I said, this just gives us a little rigor to think about which sites are the best fit for a shift to remote monitoring. And since each dimension has 10 questions, the total score possible in each is 70. Now, I have this tool. I'm happy to share it with you, but you'll see how easy you could make your own and adjust it to your own realities. So this is a methodology as much as it is a tool set. You could create your own tools. I just want to share with you the way I'm going about it with some of my customers today. So once you do that, it's about starting to visualize the results. What is the site you want? Well, let's think of these scores. Now, bear with me with one trick. These first two dimensions are sort of on the area of the study and the sponsor, or CRO. These three here, the three scoring dimensions on the bottom, site staff, site team, and site systems, are site related. Now, keep that in mind, and we'll go right to the next slide. And you'll see I can put the site factors on one dimension of an XY chart. I'm sorry, it was on the wrong dimension. On the X-axis, I have site factors. And on the Y-axis, I have study and sponsor factors. And what we want, of course, are high scorers. We want people in the top right who are really good fit from the study and sponsor side, really good fit from the site side, and we don't want low scorers in the bottom left. So this is a way to just take 10 sites or 15 sites and say, is it a good fit? And do a little bit of structured scoring. Now, people want to visualize things like this in many, many, many ways. One very traditional approach is a heat map. So let me show you a heat map. This is a silly example, but it's just a spreadsheet model where you would color different cells, and each cell is a factor in the dimension. Dimensions across the top, 5 dimensions. Factors along the side, 10 factors. Coloring them different colors for different scores. And that way, visually, you can see right away that the challenge for this particular site score is in these study attributes. The problem is more with the study than anything else, with some issues having to do with systems and processes. Heat maps are very simple, very easy. If you know Excel, you can just color cells based on scores. But there's lots of other ways to visualize it as well. One of my favorites is a radar chart. So I'm going to show you that next. Classic radar chart, It could be round, square, pentagon, hexagon. This is a 5-dimensional model that I've told you about. Here are the dimensions on each point of the pentagon. And a scoring system that you could say 1 to 7. I did it 1 to 5, and I would just interpolate the right numbers. And then you put your scores on it. Let's see what that looks like. So there's some scores for a particular site and how they scored on this assessment tool. And that's a pretty good visualization. It gives you an idea, but then you can go further, make it even cooler and prettier, and color in the points of the radar chart. And you get a very clear image that it's a different study, of course, but we have very strong study attributes and relationship factors, but weakness as far as the site staff capabilities. So on that dimension, the site staff capabilities, there's a gap. I put it in the red arrow. The score is down in the 2-point something against a 5-point best model. Just another way to visualize it. I'm going to run through it all again and just make it super clear and simple. We want a structured way to assess sites. We want to break it up into a few categories or dimensions. In each dimension, we want to score it on different attributes. I call them factors. Add them up, put them against some charts, and compare them. You could overlay multiple sites on this same radar chart to see how they compare and which ones might be the best to work with initially. Now, once you've done that, there is another question is, what about mitigating that issue? In the last slide, that was a radar chart of a site that had some issues around staff aptitude, for instance. Pretty obvious what you can do, but it makes sense to write it down. What are the gaps? And what's the risk therefore? And then what is the risk mitigation strategy? So obviously, if staff aptitude is a concern, I'm mentioning here education and training. Why both? Training to me is the keystroking. You need to make everyone comfortable. But education is the why are we doing this? Come onto our side, buy into the concept of what we're trying to do and the benefits. So there's an education part of gaining buy-in and then training. There's work aids. There's work aids like quick start guides, mini videos, etc. There's change management tricks and techniques like enlisting advocates explicitly to talk about what you're doing, act as influencers within the site, and then emphasizing the benefits to the site and sometimes changing, realigning incentives, if you will. I have that over on team dynamics of creating incentives, tying it to performance models, creating and concentration on the influencers again. Or maybe there's issues on the left side around the relationship with the site. Well, then you're going to want to build a relationship of trust before you jump into this. You're going to want to do some kind of workshopping sessions early on education again. Why are we as the CRO or sponsor doing this? What are the benefits? How is it going to work for you? Getting strong advocacy from the leadership. So on each dimension, if there's a shortfall, if there's a gap, there's things you can do about it. And you can see how this all leads up to, all right, we're going to start with a site. Here's how it's scored, and here's what we need to emphasize with this site to make it work. I feel apologetic in some ways for the simplicity of the model, but I hope that that's its strength. And it is working for me, working with customers who are trying to decide which study should I start with, which site should I start with. I'm going to finish with this idea of a fast path model to migrate into remote monitoring. And it's basically an iterative model based on the agile methodology where you'll do something, do it again, do it again, do it again, each time incrementally larger. So of course there's the analysis using the model I just mentioned, but then through 3 iterations, starting with an initial site after scoring, remediating, taking careful notes on what worked, then repeating it with a smaller group of selected sites. Again, taking note of what worked, building the tools, and then the full study. So it's an iterative model that will get you there. If we look at it another way, on 2 dimensions again, you can see study 1, our very first time, we're going to start with an initial site, work with selected sites, then make it all sites for that study. So we're going to work our way up the y-axis there. Iterate, learn, repeat. Basically, this is about leveraging the learning curve, leveraging it smaller first before you do a big bang rollout. But then once you've done that, of course, now it's about working with more studies. And you might be able to skip the single site with the next study. You might be able to start with a selected group of 3 sites before all sites. And ultimately at study N, rolling right out to all sites. So whether it's over the course of months or a few years, eventually there's a transition into remote monitoring or a hybrid model that doesn't interrupt the business, gets everybody on board, and gets you where you want to go. So I am actually done with my material, but for 2 things. In a moment, we'll take questions. I just want to remind you of who I am. My name's Ken Lowney. I'm with Agatha. And Agatha is a software vendor. We do have a remote monitoring application as well as a TMF application and standard operating procedures application, etc. But what I most want to say to you, and I know I'm bouncing around in the slides, is I want you to talk to me. Please talk to me. I'm happy to share this tool set with you. Anybody who wants it. It's just Excel and PowerPoint. There's nothing fancy here. And I'm happy to share it with you with just one requirement. Reach out to me. You can use my email, which is on the screen. You can use LinkedIn. You can just call my phone or text me. And as long as we can talk for 5 or 10 minutes and I learn about you and what you're trying to do, because it helps me with my knowledge base as I'm talking to different people with different problems. So it's just a way to force a little networking. I've got cool tools. You just got to talk to me for a couple of minutes. So hopefully that won't be too painful. I'd love to meet you, have that conversation, and then just give you whatever help that I can give of any sort. We also have a couple of white papers. I'll simply point out they're out on the website, agathahealth.com. One is the survey results. I've mentioned the survey a couple of times. And the other is our white paper on choosing technology tools for doing remote monitoring. So I set my timer. Hopefully I did it right at about 22 minutes for Kristen and Cheryl. And now we can, as I promised, shift back to take some questions.
Thanks, Ken. That was a lot of great information. And I hope people do take the opportunity to give you a call and talk to you. I had the pleasure of doing so myself. And I think I learned a lot from you that helped me with some of the things I was working on just in that short conversation. So I recommend, if you have an interest in this area, that's definitely a conversation worth pursuing. We do have some questions that have come in. So let's just take them one by one. First one, are the site data coming only from the US, or are there also international sites involved?
Great question. So in other presentations, including the panel I was on with you, Cheryl, we talked about the regulatory environment for remote monitoring. And what I stated with great passion is the FDA is completely supportive of remote monitoring. Of course, there has to be appropriate plans, et cetera, but there's no obstacle. Can you do remote monitoring without going on site? The answer is yes. Now, I get the question, can you do that in all regulatory areas? In other words, in the EU, et cetera. And my answer has to be just hedged, which is I'm working with customers who are absolutely doing it. In fact, our very first customer was in Scotland. But I'm not a regulatory expert on the EU, much less Asia. So I believe it's well supported when approached effectively, but that's how I would have to answer it. We are doing it, and I think it's the sponsors are smart people who wouldn't be doing it if we weren't allowed to do it.
Thanks for that. I think this question you might have answered already. The template for the remote monitoring transition plan that was in your presentation, that's one of the things that people can reach out to you to get, right? Just want to confirm that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think it's 4 tools, if I remember right. There's this presentation, of course. There is a template for a transition plan. There is the dimension scoring model. And then there's those radar charts. So 4 things I can provide to anyone who's interested.
Thank you. Someone wants to know, if you are doing remote monitoring, shouldn't you do it with all the sites? Because doesn't that even out the risk detection potential?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's just slightly beyond my personal depth, but I've been in rooms where this has been discussed a lot, which is it would be better to have all sites be monitored and have all quality process identical, but it is tolerable and probably necessary to have a hybrid approach where some sites are being monitored remotely through upload of documents, review of documents, creation of monitoring notes, and others continue to do it in person. So my answer is, from the rooms I've been in, listening to people as smart as you, Cheryl, and others talking about it, saying, yeah, that would be ideal, but it's not possible at all times. And the future looks like a hybrid model where there'll be increased use of remote monitoring, but certainly not exclusive use.
Yeah, I know we talk about that in the auditing space too, the remote versus on-site has a lot of the same challenges as monitors. So we do learn a lot from what you're developing in this space. One other question, what challenges, are there challenges when you rate the different sites under your 5-dimension model to get consistent results?
You know, there is. I just want to be perfectly transparent. I hedged when I first called it a scientific model, and then I backed off. It doesn't come up often, but I'm an MIT graduate, and what if one of my MIT colleagues said, "You call that science, Ken?" Because it's not. It's not tested. It's not managed. It's a structured way of collecting information. So the person asking the question is right. My answer, though, my defense, hopefully not defensive, but my defense is, it's a heck of a lot better than saying, I kind of like Kathy, let's do it with that site. So it forces you through some structured analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of each site. But you're right, it's not rigorous, it's not tested. I'm not ready to publish a peer-reviewed article yet on it. Great question.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like one of them I might have just touched on. Another question came in about, does this transfer well to remote site audits? And I don't know if you've been challenged to look at data in that space as well, or if you're just focusing on monitoring for right now.
No, when I'm speaking more slowly than my New York voice, when I'm speaking my New Hampshire voice, I try to say monitoring and quality processes. A lot of quality processes are very, very similar step by step to monitoring process. Look at this thing, assess it, make a note, accept or reject, etc. So that the software is very, very similar and our customers are using it for both. I focus on monitoring because as a neophyte, not to clinical trials, that's 20 years, but to the site side, I got very comfortable with monitoring quickly. And when people start to use the word audits and quality, I freeze up a little bit because I don't want to speak above my pay grade. But my suspicion and my customers tell me, no, we can use this for a lot of other aspects of quality oversight as well.
That's great. Another question, have you correlated remote monitoring success with your initial rating when you take a look at the data after the fact?
Great question. And back to what I said about not science, not only because it's not that rigorous of a model, but just haven't used it enough. So, if I could get, what would be a good number? 100 organizations to use this model, then come back in a year and do an assessment of how successful is remote monitoring. I'd have that data, but we're not there yet. So this is intuitive, but I hope to be there. If Kristen lets me speak next year at this conference, I can present those results.
And we'll wrap up with one more question, which is kind of where I started with in industry, is how would you handle it if a site already had an electronic system and want to use that to allow the monitor to access and review files?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll do the on the one hand and on the other. On the one hand, that's fabulous. If they're already using a product that is, without naming a product, I'll say it's something like a vault in the cloud. And that's a great thing, right? Because they're already uploading things. And if there's a backdoor into that system for a monitor to be able to look at documents and leave notes, that's a great solution. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, as another questioner said, if I have 6 sites for a study, small study with 6 sites, 2 are using this tool, 2 are using another tool, and 2 are using no tool, the complexity factor for the monitor starts to get very high. The monitor has to log into this one system, this other system. So for me, it's a weighing those things and trying to choose, at least for initial studies, a group that can be mostly using the same tool as opposed to a grouping of different tools. But we're in this world. Sites are moving fast to adopt their own technologies. Many monitors are already going in the back door to electronic record system, patient record systems. So it's going to be messy for a time before technology solves this and says, yep, there's 6 different systems, but there's this universal UI that a monitor can go into, and they don't care what the system is. They can get what they want. That's where we need to get. Let technology act as the ombudsman or the interpreter. Great question, by the way.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot today and heard a few other places. We need a common terminology and a common understanding to help facilitate all of these uncertainties that we're going to be facing and some of the new technologies coming along. And on that note, Ken, I thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And we look forward to hearing your future presentations at an upcoming conference. So at this point, I think we're going to switch over. Take care. At this point, I think we're going to switch over to our next session, which is Fred Feldstein from Johnson & Johnson, where he's the Vice President, Head of Bioresearch Quality and Compliance and Vaccines Quality and Compliance, is going to talk to us on leveraging a culture of quality in times of uncertainty.
I think as we just highlighted in the recent presentation, we can see that so much has changed. It's actually hard to believe that a little over a month ago, the first COVID-19-like symptom was identified, in the other part of the world, and quickly has become obviously a pandemic that we've been working through. And it's changed the way that our lives have been each and every day over the past, year. We've seen cities shut down, people engage in social distancing, but what we have seen as well is that our technology has become essential to connect with others at a time of isolation. And I think the 11th Proactive GCP Compliance Conference, we've seen many conferences going virtual and flawlessly as well. So we'll see how we do during my presentation. As I said, we've not only learned to work from home and kind of manage through technology, but we've also taken the opportunity as an industry to accelerate clinical trial innovation. And we've done that by reimagining, if you will, the way that we work. We've reimagined quality oversight and our framework for clinical trials in light of COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the accelerated clinical trial and R&D quality new ways of working. However, the focus of my discussion today is going to be on the importance of a culture of quality in times of uncertainty. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to discuss how a culture of quality can be leveraged to manage and accept uncertainty and how this culture can generate confidence that clinical quality is always at the top of mind. But let's do a quick poll first. I hope you can see the poll question coming up. There we go. So how do you rate the level of maturity of quality culture in your organization? Level 1 being ad hoc, level 2 being early, level 3 developing, level 4 implementing, level 5 optimizing. Okay, so we see a fair bit of developing and implementing, which I guess is better than ad hoc and early, so that's a good start. All right, so let me start with Johnson & Johnson's credo. At Johnson & Johnson, the values that guide our decision-making are spelled out in our credo. And our credo, put simply, is our North Star, and it ensures that we put the needs and well-being of the people that we serve first. Robert Wood Johnson, who was a former chairman and a member of the company's founding family, actually crafted the credo himself in 1943, just before Johnson & Johnson became a publicly traded company. And this was long before anyone had ever heard the term corporate social responsibility. Our credo, it's more than just a moral compass, it's embedded in the fabric of everything that we do. And we also believe strongly that it's the recipe for business success. And I guess you can say that Johnson & Johnson, being only one of a handful of companies that have flourished for more than a century of change, is good proof of that. And quality is a fundamental value of our company. And our credo says everything we must do must be of high quality. And I quote, "Quality is our first responsibility to the people around the world who use our products. We believe our responsibility is to the patients, doctors, and nurses, to the mothers and fathers, and all others who use our products and services. In meeting their needs, everything we do must be of high quality." And I like to use quotes. This is a famous quote by Aristotle, which is, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit." So when we talk about our credo at Johnson & Johnson, our culture of quality, what do we mean exactly by culture? Well, the dictionary says that culture is a shared beliefs, behaviors, and assumptions held by members of an organization, and I don't disagree with that. But culture is more than that. It's an attitude. It's how we do what we do, and it's reflected in our objectives, in our policies, our procedures, and the most important, in our actions. Quality culture is fundamentally, if you think about it, a mindset that reflects how innately quality is incorporated into everything we do. And behaviors are the most visible element of that culture and the most easy to influence. Culture is defined by the set of values, beliefs, assumptions, and behavior patterns exhibited in an organization, and it represents unwritten rules like how do we do things around here. It also works best by focusing on altering the behavior patterns, not by trying to change everyone's beliefs, values, and assumptions. Let me share some of the key behavioral ingredients for a culture of quality. So communication, collaboration, solution-oriented, continuous improvement, commitment, leadership emphasis, employee ownership, rewards, and recognition. And with no doubt, these behavioral ingredients are key for success while managing in times of crisis, uncertainty, and change. I'd like to share some details on our quality culture model, which consists of 4 pillars. The first is message credibility. We give credible quality messages, which applies internally and externally. The second is leadership emphasis. So our leaders prioritize quality. Quality starts with me, and this includes everyone at Johnson & Johnson, not just the quality organization. Employee ownership is the third, meaning I'm responsible for what happens, being able to see the big picture, seeing the impact each employee as an individual has through his or her actions is critical for ownership. And we've never seen this flourish more at Johnson & Johnson in the pharmaceutical sector as an example than what's happening today and the past several months as we continue to work on our COVID vaccine. That gives those colleagues in particular a real close connection to the outcomes of their work. And the fourth is celebration and reward. We celebrate success in quality, and recognition and celebration is so important, as I'm sure everybody knows, particularly in challenging times. So let me go to another poll. Now that I shared the 4 pillars of Johnson & Johnson's quality culture and talked about some of the key behaviors, I wanted to ask, which of the below key behavioral ingredients for quality culture do you consider most important, or did you consider to be the most important during the COVID-19 crisis and the ongoing crisis? 1, communication. 2, collaboration. Solution-orientated, continuous improvement, commitment, leadership emphasis, employee ownership, rewards and recognition, or all of the above? Okay, that's great to see. So a fair spread across, I guess we can say in many instances, many of the different behavioral attributes. Okay, so how did we leverage our credo and our culture of quality to help us during the times of crisis and uncertainty? And how does our culture generate confidence that clinical quality is always top of mind? By everything we did and we do, we're guided by our credo, as I mentioned, and we live into our culture. I invite you to join me and reflect on the events earlier this year and how key stakeholders in the clinical research ecosystem reacted and mentioned in earlier presentations. Obviously, COVID-19 had a tremendous ramification on clinical trial conduct, which required rapid adaptation, in many cases mitigations, and also a lot of innovation and new ways of working. Challenges have been arising from the quarantine, site closures, travel limitations, interruptions to supply chain for investigational product, and other considerations of site personnel or trial participants, for example, become infected with COVID-19. And these challenges may lead to difficulties in meeting protocol-specified procedures, including administering or using investigational product or adhering to protocol-mandated visits and laboratory testing, for example. In March, the FDA and other health authorities recognized that COVID-19 was a public health emergency that could impact the conduct of clinical trials. And so what we saw was a number of guidances and recommendations coming out on clinical trial management during COVID-19, focusing in areas of risk-based approach, remote monitoring, remote auditing, direct-to-patient, product delivery, and virtual site visits, just to name a few. And at the time, it seemed that the COVID-19 crisis or pandemic was a real catalyst for a number of advancements in clinical trial innovation, management, and oversight activities. So the way that we reacted to the crisis is clearly linked to our full 4 pillars of quality, of our quality culture model. Let me share one example per pillar, if you will. So for message credibility, during the times of COVID, this included sharing information on our prioritization methodology, on our areas of prioritization across our clinical trial framework and clinical trial execution, with a clear focus on serving patients in our clinical trials and maintaining continuity for patients in our clinical trials. With regards to leadership emphasis, we had to prioritize the continuance of our clinical trials and support the rapid start of trials focused on COVID-19 treatment and the vaccine. And this methodology we applied for prioritization and rationale were transparently shared throughout the organization, and at all times we were guided by our credo, as I shared before. In terms of employee ownership, we regularly shared updates on our company response to COVID-19. We had open mic sessions frequently throughout the organization, and this was a way that we could engage the organization as well. We could meet with vast numbers of colleagues across our over 130,000 employees in our organization, and we had more and more frequency of discussion than ever before. And then in terms of celebration and reward, as mentioned, this is part of our culture. And despite the many priorities that we have and that we work through, we never stop to celebrate or reward success and quality. We went to great lengths to virtually celebrate our quality month, which I'll share a little bit more of. And we really celebrated those colleagues, with efforts across our entire organization and not just on our COVID treatments and vaccine. We had a lot of questions to answer when we discussed the continuance of our trials or start new ones to address the COVID-19 public health crisis. We needed to ensure that we kept safety of trial participants top of mind, that we maintained compliance with GCP, and that we minimize risks to trial integrity. And for our clinical trials, we had to find rapid solutions to enabling clinical trial continuance and to accelerate the planning and initiation of new studies. And as I mentioned, our COVID-19 vaccine studies, I should say. And we didn't only ensure that we save trials, right? We didn't only ensure that we continued trials. We wanted patients to know that they mattered. So we've been embracing opportunities to work with regulators, academia, industry, to change the game of access and data. Clinical trial continuance, along with reimagining our quality oversight framework, enabled us to access innovative treatments, enabled patients, I should say, to access innovative treatments. And this was particularly critical for cancer patients, which make up over half of our therapeutic focus areas in our Janssen pharmaceutical company. I have no doubt that all of you have heard about the impressive acceleration of clinical trial innovation and reimagined quality frameworks. You've heard this during virtual conferences like this one, many webinars, and I'm sure blogs, articles, white papers that have all been focusing on it. I just want to take a moment to kind of key in on some of these points again. And it's fascinating, if you think about it, that this is a topic that we've been discussing across industry for at least 15 years, where the first feasibility study, the first internet trials, the first remote trials were being conducted in our industry. So decentralization of our studies was key in our efforts to serve patients. The successful move was possible through cross-functional collaboration and collaboration with external partners and vendors. And these efforts included things such as the use of telemedicine, the conduct of home health visits, decentralized lab collection, as I mentioned before, direct-to-patient product shipment, data collection through wearables and apps, and increase in digital ePro and things like clinical photography and patient engagement, and make sure that we met adherence. As I said, this is something that's a hot topic, if you will, for a good 10, 15 years now. But I hope that with the learnings and urgencies from the COVID-19 pandemic, we can take the next steps in our journey around new ways of working. We feel that, and I feel that as sponsors, we're both ethically and economically obliged to continue ongoing trials and ensuring that decisions around protocol revisions and other trial adjustments are properly captured. And it's essential that these are documented for scientific integrity of the trial. And implementing virtual models is, a tremendous way to continue clinical trials through COVID-19, not just to continue them, but to also closely oversee them and ensure, new ways of working for the future as well. Simplifying protocols is another essential way to influence study endpoints, leverage technology, use of telehealth, as I was mentioning, and the use of risk-based monitoring, which has been a journey in and of itself, was a key area of focus as well. In our company, we looked at different ways through R&D quality to enable our response to COVID-19. New ways of interacting with patients through new and expanded vendor relationships, as I mentioned. We've been busy collaborating and making sure that we've adopted rapid acceleration and modernization of clinical trials. Telemedicine vendors has been a key area for us to be able to collaborate and bring them on board to be able to work with us. And different areas, as I mentioned previously, tremendous number of regulatory change has led to a number of procedural adaptations and a number of questions across our organization that had to be captured to be able to work most efficiently. And then, as I shared, things like remote auditing, which were essential through the pandemic travel-related restrictions to be able to cover oversight effectively and efficiently. And for that, we used a whole bevy of technology as well, including smart glasses, virtual interviews, and the use of data which was remote through e-consent, for example, or ePro, eCOA that we could capture and review virtually as well. So before I discuss some of our Quality Month activities, which I mentioned earlier, I invite you to participate in our third and my final poll, which is the ongoing GCP renovation may incorporate QBD, Quality by Design concepts, into ICH E8. Establishing a quality culture is considered one of the key approaches to enhance the identification of critical to quality factors. True or false? All right, very astute. So let me just, before I share more about the Quality Month celebrations at Johnson & Johnson, I'd like to come back to what I said for a minute on simplifying clinical protocols. An excellent example of this is Oxford's randomized evaluation of COVID therapy recovery trial. What you saw there is that the recovery team reported that the time frame from conception to launch of this adaptive platform trial just took 9 days. The recovery trial protocol was streamlined and simplified and has one primary outcome, mortality within 28 days, which is a few clinical and process outcomes, such as the need for ventilation and duration of hospital stay. The team consciously applied and adopted QBD principles, and one of the regulatory highlights of 2019 was the publication of a new guidance, which is the revision of E8, Revision 1, on general considerations for clinical studies by ICH, which hasn't been updated in 21 years. And what you can see is that the guidance clearly focuses on quality by design, which then, if adopted successfully, will result in simplified protocols. And moreover, the ICH suggests embracing, that's right, quality culture, a quality culture. So those of you, which was everybody, who indicated in the poll that it was true, that establishing a quality culture is considered one of the key approaches to enhance the identification of critical to quality factors, was right. So good job. At J&J, our quality culture is, as I mentioned, it's an elemental attitude that's already integrated into our organizations, into our daily rituals, our stories, and our symbols, and we see it reflected in the company's adherence. In the company's adherence to quality policies, to quality standards, and compliance monitoring through audits and inspections, and continuous improvement in our ongoing enhancement of talent and capabilities through training and education. And we also see it in the way that we apply it across the company and celebrate it on a yearly basis by what we call our quality month, which always occurs on the month of October. So we're coming just on the celebration of a couple months since our quality month. But of course, we like to say that every day and every month is quality month, but we do take the time in October every year to celebrate quality month. And the focus of that is much more than meeting compliance standards. It's really about everyone taking an opportunity to do the right thing and to keep earning the unparalleled trust of our customers, our patients, and each other. The quality, our focus across the month of October is to encourage employees across all of our company sectors, medical device, consumer, and pharmaceuticals, across all our functions, levels, locations, to take the time to celebrate the many different ways that we own quality, to share stories of the ways that we bring quality to life for patients and our communities, to share and show recognition across our organization for those who continue to make quality a priority each and every day. And we also offer sessions on many different topics throughout Quality Month. This year's, for example, was on the neuroscience of leadership, which is critical and fundamental, without going into tremendous detail on the neuroscience of leadership, but in engaging leaders to become great leaders for the organization, and how, if you will, kind of the way that the brain functions and works, can fundamentally change leadership styles and engagement across the entire organization. So just in the interest of time, because I want to spend a few minutes taking questions, I'll invite you to read, for example, Robert Deutsch, who's a psychiatrist and author of The Brain That Changes Itself. He reflects on the neuroscience of leadership, and also authors Jeffrey Schwartz, Josie Thompson, and R. Kleiner wrote The Neuroscience of Strategic Leadership, which is another key read on that. Now, before I close, let me add that in addition to our creator and our culture, particularly in the pharmaceutical sector of Johnson & Johnson, but for all of Johnson & Johnson, we're clearly still inspired by one of our founders, Dr. Paul Janssen. He was one of the 20th century's most innovative and inspiring pharmaceutical researchers. He and his teams at Janssen Pharmaceutica, which is the pharmaceutical sector of Johnson & Johnson, discovered more than 80 interesting and new molecules that changed really entire medical fields. And at the time of his death in 2003, he held over 100 patents and was an author of over 850 scientific publications. And he's most known, and you see this decorated across all of the walls in Johnson & Johnson, for his passion for patients. And one of his best known sentences is, "There's so much more to be done. The patients are waiting." And we keep that at the core of everything that we do each and every day in our actions. So thank you for your attention, and I will turn it over for questions.
Thanks, Fred. That was a great talk and a really nice way to inspire us there at the end. I love the drawing that someone's child made of their mom at their computer. being a quality professional. And also there's a comment in the chat about love this idea to get people to walk the talk. And I think that's a really important concept. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in. One of the first ones, how do you balance quality culture with the need or pressure to get submissions out the door, new drug filings, to health authorities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. As I mentioned, our credo really guides us by making sure that everything that we do is focused on patient safety and um, medical innovation and breakthrough for patients. So it's a balance. With that said, we would never compromise anything that we do for timelines or any other aspects. We prioritize our work. We have strong governances in place to ensure that the focus is there. And we hear that. In fact, many of the decisions that we make, you'll hear leaders and colleagues talking alike, is this a decision that's compatible and consistent with our credo? Does this, clearly adhere to our quality principles? It's in the fabric, so it's not something that needs to be, if you will, balanced outward every day, but it's something that I think is really woven into the way that all colleagues work. And of course, there's a component of this that you also want to make sure that we work with urgency and speed, because many of the products that we're working on, not just the COVID vaccine and this pandemic, but other areas where patients are waiting, as I said from Dr. Jansen, we come with that mindset each and every day, but never to sacrifice, quality, patient safety, data integrity. And so it's just built into our fabric.
Great. And kind of on that new opportunities you were just talking about, you mentioned apps and wearables in your presentation. What are the key things you would recommend for consideration from a quality perspective when a company is looking to implement these into their studies?
Sure. So obviously, from a quality perspective, you want to make sure that vendors that you're going to be utilizing, because most of the technology is coming from partnerships and collaborations externally, that the frameworks are built with those vendors for quality, that they have the right approach, the right culture, the right integrity, the right data, the right audit trails, all those technical aspects as well, that you do the right diligence and oversight from the perspective of a vendor, but also you have to have the right a partnership as well with them. Internally, it also requires kind of stretching the thinking of the organization. And as I mentioned, a lot of the areas that we've been working on with regards to virtualization, decentralization of trials has been in the works for 15 years. And so it's kind of, it's in a way the silver lining of the pandemic is that there's been this recognition that there needs to be new ways of working. I think that the change focus from colleagues has taken clearly 15 plus years, and we're still working through some of that. But the technology has advanced itself into a way that you can leverage many different aspects of working. Now, there's still some regulatory hurdles in some of the components, particularly around things such as privacy. But we've seen through partnerships that we are able to decentralize and virtualize a lot of the work that we're doing. And so, the focus and the hope of being able to continue trials for patients who need them so desperately is so important beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. And to think about ways, as I mentioned earlier, as to not just how we continue trials, but how we, make trials with the patient at the center and easily accessible all around the world, across all different populations and diversity of populations as well. So that's a key focus area, I think, coming out of the pandemic for not just Johnson & Johnson, but for the entire industry.
That's great. I'm going to wrap this up here with just a combined set of questions. Can you just elaborate on the importance of employee engagement? You mentioned open mic sessions. How did that increase engagement, and will this be embedded in your quality culture? And then what other potential major activities or events at Johnson & Johnson that you feel are most effective in improving quality culture? So if you kind of talk to it as a concept, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we also leverage each year, which I didn't go into here, is many companies have some sort of employee engagement survey. What we have seen actually is that our employee engagement this year has gone, dramatically up. I think a few variables for that has been the success of the transparency of the conversation, as I shared earlier, with things like open mic sessions, sharing the prioritization and outcomes of our portfolio across all of our sectors. And then, of course, being very tangibly able to see the outcomes of the work that colleagues are engaged in each and every day. Those are very powerful for colleagues to kind of take forward, and I think increases engagement. The engagement is fundamental, right? Because no matter everything that we have, if you don't have that engagement, you cannot propel an organization forward. But I think everyone is kind of inspired by the reality that we're working on ways to not just eradicate a pandemic, but cure and solve terrible diseases and tremendous innovations around the world and around patients. And in addition to our open mic sessions, we of course had very different ways to engage the organization, from town halls to quick fire challenges to different aspects where they can engage with different leaders and peers across the entire organization and get involved throughout this pandemic. Obviously, the flexibility from the organization has been tremendous. And the ability to really stay connected, I think, has been the most important thing that we've been able to accomplish. And of course, being able to see the prioritization and implementation of new ways of working, if you will, kind of cutting through, dynamics of an organization that's a very large organization, has been in many ways very empowering and engaging for, colleagues that are directly at the front line working on, many aspects of the pandemic and beyond.
Well, your passion is obvious, so thank you for sharing that with us. There was one other question that we didn't get a chance to answer. It was about building a quality culture, specifically with a small startup company. We are actually having a roundtable discussion on that in a short amount of time, so hopefully that person and others that are interested in that topic can join us for that roundtable on, can a culture of quality be effective at a small company? Perfect timing and segue. So Fred, thank you very much for your time today. And before Kristen jumps on to wrap us up for the day, I just want to say thank you to everybody who participated with us during this day. I know there's some great sessions coming up later again this afternoon with the roundtables, and tomorrow and Wednesday. Some real key messages I think I've heard all day, really about a common language, being agile, advocating for each other, educating each other, helping to leverage and learn information from the different departments that either are with us externally or outside the organization such as this. So on that note, I know we're going to be wrapping up here for the day, and Kristen, I'll turn it back over to you, but thanks for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for doing an amazing job as chair today. That was fantastic. So as Cheryl mentioned, we are not finished for the day. We're finished with our sessions, but we have an opportunity to keep these discussions going and have the audience involved through Zoom roundtables. So in about 10 minutes at 4:30, we have two options of topics. We have, what are you doing beyond source data verification, which will be, I know a lot of people are dealing with that. So that will be nice to share your experiences. And then for those smaller companies that we saw, we had quite a few small companies participating. We have, can a culture of quality be effective at a small company? So we heard Fred talk about what they're doing at Johnson & Johnson, which is amazing, but how do you scale that down for a small company who was only dealing with a few hundred, even less than that, people? So that'll be a great discussion too. The links to get into these roundtables are in the lobby through the theater. I'm also going to be sending an email out momentarily to everyone that will also include those links. Remember, the roundtables are not recorded. So this is the only part of the conference that we are not recording and will not be available on demand. We found that the roundtables are a lot better when people are not being recorded. People share more. It's your chance to let your hair down. Use it as a venting session if you need to. I'm lonely. Everyone's lonely in the pandemic. If you just want to talk or listen to other people talk, that's fine too. What stays at the round table, what's said at the round table, stays at that round table. So that'll be at 4:30. You can get there through the theater. You can get there through the email I'm about to send. And then those go for an hour, and then we're finished with our day, and we'll be back tomorrow, 9:30. The virtual environment opens, and our sessions start at 10. So I look forward to seeing hopefully many of you on the roundtable.